What made you have the Eastern Orthodox position mainly on Christology?
Yeah, so I did put a considerable amount of time into the topic because when I first got into Orthodox theology in 2007, I think it's the case for everybody. You kind of get presented with a lot of different channels and options, and like there's the liberal Orthodox, like David Bentley Hart, and there's the Universalism, and there's the Romanites is very anti-Western stuff, and there's all these different. There's this whole smattering of like other issues if you go the Orthodox route. That like if you're Roman Catholic, you don't really care about any of that. So I did eventually have to tackle this issue of Christology, but I also had a lot of interest in Christology because I understood the importance of how Christology is reflective of Trinitarian theology. And then, so the Trinity will determine the mode of your Christology. That will then determine your ecclesiology and your soteriology. So I kind of understood that, and that's why I realized that the Christological issues would be of the utmost importance, because that's really going to condition the way that we understand soteriology in the church. And so for me, it boiled down to a lot of different texts that I read. I started with God, History, Dialectic, Volume 1. That one was really important for laying out not just the essence, energy, distinction, and the fathers, but the later chapters in Volume 1 get into the dispute with Pyrrhus, the dispute with Severus, and the presuppositions that a lot of the 5th, 6th, 7th century Orientals had. And then I had to go and read Maximus's, dispute with Pyrrhus. I had to go read the 5th Council, the theology around the 5th Council, and understanding that there are a lot of errors and misconceptions that can come out of Chalcedon. And so when we understand that Chalcedon wasn't enough, we needed another council. That's the 5th Council is the most important for all this question. Now, you might think Ephesus is the most important, and it is. Ephesus definitely matters. And I'm happy to talk, at length about Ephesus as well, because in our view, what happens is that Ephesus is obviously Cyril, and then Chalcedon has Cyril. Yeah, that's the book I was going to go to. Chalcedon has Cyril as the sort of standard. And a lot of people don't know that they were testing the writings of Leo against Cyril. But I do think that Chalcedon left some things unclear and uncertain, and that's why there's the 5th Council. And so the key to understanding what the whole dispute is the 4th and the 5th Council. And what happens at the 5th Council is that they say that the 4th Council, that Ephesus Chalcedon has to be read in a neo-Kyrilian way. You have to read it in a Kyrilian way, and they explicitly reject the potential Nestorian readings of Chalcedon. So to be really clear about that, when St. Cyril is using the phrase miaphysis, one incarnate nature of God the Word, there's two different senses to the word hypostasis, and that's one of the main sources of confusion over the issue. In Nicaea, when they use hypostasis, for example, Athanasius in Nicaea, they use it to mean just simply an incarnate nature. That's it. An individuated incarnate nature. So you could speak, for example, of a hypostasis of a dog, hypostasis of a cat. It just means an individuated nature. That's all it meant. And that's why for Athanasius, he was trying to defend the deity of the Son, right? And so hypostasis had that key usage there. But when we get to the Cappadocians, hypostasis begins to be used in a more precise way, particularly in Basil's letters, in Gregory Nazianzus and Gregory of Nyssa. So it doesn't mean that there's no sense in which it's just an incarnate nature, but it's more so specified to be the agent that has the nature, the subject. And that's a specification that the Cappadocians use. And then, as I understand it, I find this, and I see this in Cyril in both ways. So when Cyril uses one incarnate nature of God the Word, he's just speaking of a single hypostasis, a single incarnation, right? The one being that's incarnate there. But if you look at the two letters to Sixcensus, which is at the appendix of this book, right? That's the later Cyril. Cyril doesn't have a problem using the terminology after the incarnation, after the resurrection, I should say, of two distinct natures. So, so hypostasis in this regard refers to the agent here, right? So I'm looking at Pano's quotes. I'm getting distracted. Yeah, hypostasis can mean aerosol, secondary substance, or Plotinus is locus of consciousness, or a person, which is a patristic usage, right? So person is in this sense going to be used for the subject or agent. So this is partly the dispute at Chalcedon, is the confusion over which usage is being had. So the key here is that when we get to the Fifth Council, and there's a great 2 books on the Fifth Council, is Meindorf's Byzantine Theology and the Kenneth Vesha book on the person of Christ and the Christology of Saint Justinian. And what happens there is that that's an attempt at reunion, and there's an admission that Chalcedon kind of left things unclear. It left things open. And so the admission is then, how are we going to understand hypostasis in the Fifth Council? Is it the product of the incarnation, or is it the ground of the incarnation? And so if we had the proper sense in which Cyril meant it, it's the ground of the incarnation and not a product of it. The Western tendency, especially like Roman Catholics or Calvinists or people that sort of stop at Chalcedon, they do tend to have a Nestorian reading. They'll read it as, oh, the hypostatic union is the one incarnate hypostasis of Christ is this product of the two natures. No, the hypostasis becomes the person or the subject that has both natures. And if you don't distinguish nature and person, this doesn't make any sense. That's why Severus says that the distinction between nature and person in the Trinity is not reflected into Christology. Right. But the problem is that in the Cappadocians it is, because that's where the distinction comes from. And the Cappadocians and Cyril, they matter for both Chalcedon and for the Fifth Council. So the solution is just simply that the Sixth Council reiterates that the subject or agent is the second person of the Godhead, the Logos. The human nature that he has when he assumed it was not personal. In other words, it doesn't have a subject. It's an hypostatic considered in itself. But when it is assumed by the Logos, yeah, so Leontius, but more important than Leontius's book is the other, is Sophronius of Jerusalem. And that's because the Fifth Council takes not so much Leontius of Byzantium, he matters, but Leontius of Jerusalem, who has the phrase in hypostatize. And this is the key phrase that the Fifth Council uses to try to explain what was meant before. Yes, he does say that. I can give you the references where Severus says that. Severus is using the older terminology of the old, they're called the Old Nicenes, where hypostasis just means a nature. There is no human subject, so that so people in the chat are all confused. God assuming human nature means that he's the God of the human subject. There is no human subject, okay, at all. So in hypostatize means that the human nature that he assumed now exists in the mode of the personal Logos, who has that human nature. So that's the Fifth Reunion Council's explanation of how Chalcedon should have said things. And for a lot of the Orientals, that was sufficient. Then the problem becomes the conflicting saints, because we have different lists of saints, right? So it looks to me like, you've done enough reading on this where you've gotten sort of established in this matter that, I don't really have to rehearse a lot of the background to it, because if you read those texts, then you know that this then shifts by the time of Maximus to a debate about energies, right? So energies become the locus of the debate, because it's no longer about distinction between nature and person. It's now a distinction between two different types of energies. And does Christ have a human energy and a divine energy? And the Fifth Council also specified that, as well as the Sixth Council too, more precisely in the Sixth Council, that the human energy and will is deified by the divine energy and will. And to my mind, the locus of this debate really ends up being in the energy dispute. And if you have a clear understanding of two wills and two energies, and the energy signifies nature, as the Cappadocians taught, really the Cappadocians kind of solved this whole issue, right? So the human nature of Christ participates in not the divine nature, but the divine energies that deify and transfigure the human nature and the human energy. So everything that he does, St. Cyril says, in a human way, he does divinely, and everything he does in a divine way, he does humanly. And that's the union is a true union via the energies. The energies are the key component that takes the human nature, deifies it, but it still retains its natural properties as being created. It never loses that property, because natures can't cease being what they were, right? And if the energies signify the nature, then Christ always has a divine energy and he always has a human energy, and they perfectly are synergized to be a divine human operator or actor in all cases. And if you read John Damascus, that's how he interprets Cyril's one incarnate nature and one energy.
Divinity raises the humanity of Christ through theosis, and that's exactly what we experience.